Hello, I am Erin Metz, a Senior Accessibility Specialist with the Disability Equity Office, joined by Katrina Johnson, providing ASL interpretation. We're here today to go over everything you need to know about service animals at the University of Michigan. The University of Michigan is committed to fostering an inclusive environment where accessibility and needs of individuals with disabilities are prioritized, ensuring equitable opportunities for all members of our diverse community. This workshop is going to cover some ADA basics, discuss the difference between service animals, those in training, and emotional support animals. We'll go over some handler rights and responsibilities, service animal etiquette, and then cover the most frequently asked questions. Because we are discussing service animals in both employment and educational contexts, it's important to remember that service animals as reasonable accommodations may be covered by multiple legal frameworks, including the Fair Housing Act, or FHA, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and Michigan Public Act 75 of 2022. The Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA of 1990, updated in 2008, is a key piece of legislation that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities across various domains, like employment, places of public education, and public spaces. It's important to note that for the purposes of the ADA, service animals are not covered under employment or Title I. This will become important later on as we discuss the need for reasonable accommodations to bring service animals into the workplace. The ADA is very clear in the intent to consider disability broadly to ensure the greatest protections for individuals with disabilities, to enable them to receive equal access, and to prevent discriminatory treatment. This means there's not an exhaustive list of conditions, and an individualized assessment of a person's condition is required when making a disability determination. So service animals can be used as an accommodation for people with physical, neurological, psychological, and physiological disabilities. The university is required to provide academic adjustments and auxiliary aids and services to students when they're necessary. They're also required to afford a student with an equal opportunity to participate in programs and services offered by the school. The university, however, is not required to make an adjustment that results in a fundamental alteration of a program or service, or one that imposes an undue burden. The university also does not need to provide an accommodation to an individual who is not qualified. Qualified individuals are those who meet the requirements for the position or the academic program with or without reasonable accommodation. Employers are required to provide modifications or adjustments to a job or the work environment that would enable an applicant or employee with a disability to participate in the application process or to perform essential job functions to ensure that the individual has the same rights and privileges in employment as those without disabilities. So now let's talk about service animals in training, and emotional support animals so we can understand the difference. A service animal is any dog or miniature horse that's individually trained to do work or perform a task for the benefit of the individual with a disability. These works or tasks performed by the service animal must be directly correlated to the individual's disability. Remember, service animals are working animals. They are not pets, and they are not emotional support animals. Some of the most common types of service animals are guide dogs, who serve as travel tools, and psychiatric service dogs that can detect the onset of episodes and lessen effects. This could include performing tasks like providing reminders to take medicine, performing room safety checks, and turning on lights. Other common animals are sensory or SSIG dogs that can cue a person to pay attention to street crossings or crosswalks when they're walking to their job. Or a dog might listen for a parent calling a child's name and guide the parent to the child. Seizure response dogs can help predict seizures and warn the person in advance to sit down or move to a safe place. And hearing dogs can alert their handler to a sound, such as a knock at the door or a doorbell. Just note that there are many types of service animals, and this list is just a very small glimpse into some of the tasks that service dogs can be trained to perform. Service animals are allowed to go anywhere their handler is allowed in places of public accommodation, and in places that are owned or operated by federal or state governments that accept funding. This includes the University of Michigan. Service animals in training are covered under Michigan Public Act 75 of 2022 and are considered equivalent to service animals for the purpose of training in public spaces. So these animals are accompanied by an animal raiser or a trainer with the intent that this animal is being raised, socialized, and trained in order to become a service animal. Emotional support animals, sometimes referred to as comfort animals, are not service animals, and they are not covered by the ADA or by Michigan state law. Emotional support animals differ from service animals in that they do not have any special training to perform specific tasks to assist a person with a disability. ESAs instead provide comfort or companionship, help with loneliness, and can sometimes help with depression, anxiety. ESAs can also be any type of animal, like the pig in the image here. And under the Fair Housing Act, they may be allowed in housing as an accommodation. Therapy animals are similar to ESAs. They are used to provide therapeutic contact in clinical settings to improve physical, emotional, and cognitive function. They are not covered under the ADA and are not provided as reasonable accommodations. For the purpose of the remainder of this presentation, we'll be focusing on individuals with disabilities that utilize service animals or service animals in training. So let's discuss service animal handler rights and responsibilities. The laws regarding the rights of owners and handlers of service animals are very prescriptive, including the questions that can be asked of a handler or owner of a service animal. Keep in mind, these questions are only appropriate if the reason for the service animal is not obvious. For example, an employee should not ask these questions to an individual who is using a guide dog and can be identified as blind or low vision. The first question we're allowed to ask: is this dog or miniature horse a service animal required because of a disability? Our best practice recommendation is to not ask question number 2 if the answer to this question is yes, unless you have a very specific reason to ask. But question number 2, what work or task is the service animal trained to perform? Remember, the task needs to be something specific related to the individual's disability, and providing comfort is not a specific task. Something else to note, the task the service animal is trained to perform does not need to be tied to the essential job functions of the employee's position. Also, it's never appropriate to ask an animal to display or perform its task. Handlers must ensure their service animal is housebroken. Service animals must also be under the care and control of their handler at all times. However, care and control can mean or look like different things. Service animals can be leashed or tethered in public unless these devices interfere with the service animal's work or the individual can't use these items because of their disability. But they can also be under control by voice or some other signal. Control also means that the animal is not repeatedly barking or causing a disturbance in a public space. So some examples of what care and control can look like. A person who uses a wheelchair is using a retractable leash so their animal can pick up or retrieve items. But even if that animal is far away, it's still under the care and control of its handler. Another example, a person with PTSD has a service animal that enters a room, reviews it for a threat, and then goes back to its handler to signal that it's safe to enter. So the animal needs to be off leash to perform its task, but then can go back on the leash once that task is complete. Our final example, a nurse who uses a service animal for seizure signaling leaves their service animal under their desk while they're escorting a patient into an exam room. The animal can be tethered under the desk or can be signaled using the voice command. The ADA does not require covered entities to modify policies, practices, or procedures if it fundamentally alters the nature of goods, services, programs, or activities that are provided to the public, nor does it overrule legitimate safety requirements. If admitting service animals does fundamentally alter the nature of the program or service, the service animal may be prohibited. In addition, if that service animal is out of care and control and the handler does not take effective action to control it or if it's not housebroken, that animal may be excluded. Some of the reasons that we may exclude service animals could be in a residence hall if a specific room has been reserved solely for use of individuals with allergies to dogs. Another could be in a research lab. A service animal could be restricted if there is a predator-prey relationship, or in a burn unit where sterilization is critical to patient care, or at a public pool. Though the animal can be allowed on the deck, it can be excluded from entry into the water. Handlers and service animals are allowed to go in any place that the public is invited in or able to go. Handlers are also allowed to address the behavior of the service animal if it is not under control. But if the animal cannot be permitted because it is out of control, the handler has a right to put the animal somewhere else, but then enter that space themselves without their animal. Please be aware that any decision to deny entry of a service animal due to any of these reasons should be made in consultation with either the ADA coordinator or legal counsel for the university, because it's a very rare occurrence in a public setting. Service animals are not specifically mentioned in Title I of the ADA, which covers employment. This means that disabled people who are seeking to bring their service animals to work need to request an accommodation to do so. What this means for an employer is that they need to engage in the interactive process and evaluate this accommodation request, just like any other type of accommodation would be evaluated. There may be some spaces where a service animal cannot go. For example, if an employee handles food, the service animal may be restricted to specific areas where other regulations or laws could apply. However, this likely would not exclude the animal from admittance to break rooms or cafeterias where there may be food. We strongly encourage employees to submit their requests for accommodations to the Disability Equity Office, as we're trained to assist with the nuances regarding service animal accommodations. But if for some reason the service animal is not possible as an accommodation, the employee should be provided alternate accommodations that provide equally effective access to their essential job functions. In addition to bringing a service animal to work as an accommodation, other accommodations may also be needed. Some examples could include allowing the employee to participate in the training of the service animal while at work, providing a private or dedicated workspace, providing additional break periods, and offering animal relief areas. Please remember that these are animals, and just like us, we can be nervous in new spaces. So we should allow for grace and understanding, keeping in mind that the handler still needs to have control of their animal. As mentioned before, service animals need to be housebroken. There should also be a designated area provided for the employee to tend to the animal's basic needs. Our office also recommends offering disability awareness training for departments if a service animal might be in the workplace. So now let's talk about service animal etiquette. When it comes to service animals in the workplace, we've broken down some tips into do's and don'ts. Do make sure you're addressing the person, not the animal. Give the handler time and space, but also be on the lookout for a service animal without its handler, as this could indicate a need for assistance. Don't interact with the service animal in any way. This means we're not feeding, approaching, petting, or otherwise distracting the animal from its work. Also, do not ask questions about the handler's disability. Make sure to acknowledge that a service animal is a needed piece of the owner's medical assistance and daily life, and their need for a service animal should not be frowned upon, cause frustration, or lead to judgment. Any interference with their job can be dangerous for the owner, so be sure to give service animal teams the space they need to go about their work. The most frequent issue we hear about is people talking to and interfering with the animal during the workday. So now that an accommodation for a service animal is in place, how do you as a supervisor address questions or communicate about the presence of a service animal in the workplace? You may be concerned about how to address questions from other occupants of the building or for other employees. So a sign could be one option, but it should be discussed with the employee so their preferences can be figured out and to find out if it's appropriate. Perhaps the employee wants to educate coworkers and is willing to do so, but if not, you may want to simply just let coworkers know that a dog's going to be present in the workspace and they're not to interact with it. If a coworker or another person in the building indicates that they have an allergy or fear related to the service animal, you would need to accommodate that other employee as well. When crafting communication to a team, remember that disability is confidential. So we recommend sending an email rather than engaging in open discussion during meetings in order to maintain privacy. So you can share that an animal is in the workplace for a specific purpose and not to interact with it. Encourage employees who have questions to reach out directly to the supervisor. Moving on now to our most frequently asked questions. Do service animals need to wear identifying vests or harnesses? Absolutely not. Service animals are not required to be marked in any special way to indicate their designation as a service animal. Some individuals choose to use a vest or some other identifying patch to assist with identification, but it is not a requirement. Do service animals need to be certified, registered, or show proof of training? No to each of these. Service animals must only be individually trained to provide a specific task for the individual with a disability. Sometimes it's the handler or owner that does that training. Sometimes it's a specific school, but there is no requirement to who does the training as long as the animal is trained. Mandatory registration is also not allowed under the ADA or under Michigan law. Are there breed restrictions or size restrictions for service animals? There are not. Service animals can be any type of dog or miniature horse, even if there are breed restrictions in a particular location. Are there specific requirements for service mini horses? The requirements are the same for service dogs, though there is an added requirement that wherever the establishment is, it needs to be able to safely accommodate the type, size, and weight of the miniature horse. Can service animals be denied entry because of fear or allergies to dogs? No. Neither of these options is a reason to deny an individual with a disability the use of its service animal in public places or in the workspace. Instead, we'll need to find a way to accommodate both the individual using the service animal and the individual with an allergy. So there may be a need for an interactive process for two individuals. Is proof of vaccination required for service animals? It's possible, maybe. If there is a local ordinance or state law that requires vaccination or registration of all animals, the same rule would apply to service animals. However, unless there is a specific requirement to provide vaccination information for all animals, we should not ask for vaccination documentation for service animals. If I have a disability and register my dog, is that dog now a service animal? No. And the reason is because the dog must be individually trained to perform a task related to the individual's disability in order to be considered a service animal. A person who registers an untrained dog, like an emotional support animal or their pet, with the state of Michigan may be guilty of a misdemeanor. It's also a misdemeanor for an individual without a disability to represent their pet, ESA, or therapy animal as if it were a service animal. What documentation may employers request related to service animals? We're only going to request medical documentation when the need for the accommodation of the service animal is not obvious. So we would look for documentation to support that the employee has a disability and to understand functional limitations. Though we may rely on the employee's explanation of what task the service animal is performing. Can a service animal be trained by its handler during work hours? Yes. A handler in Michigan can bring their service animal in training to work so the animal can learn to perform its task in the spaces that the handler is most commonly going to be in. However, if someone is training a service animal for a different person, meaning that the person training the animal does not have a disability and the service animal will not be working with them, this may be permitted with the approval of the employer, but under the ADA, this is not a reason for an accommodation. If the training interferes with work obligations, the employee still needs to adhere to performance standards of any other employee, regardless of the accommodation that may be in place. If a service animal is out of control and the handler needs to leave, what should happen next? If the handler can't bring their animal back under control, the animal may need to be removed from the area. The handler should be allowed to leave their work environment to bring the animal home or to its crate, and then be allowed to return back to the workplace. Our best practice recommendation is to discuss with the handler what should occur if there is an emergency, meaning we should have a plan in place to understand what steps we should take. And lastly, where can I find more information or frequently asked questions and answers about service animals? You can visit ada.gov, JAN, or the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, or you can contact the Disability Equity Office if you have more questions. We hope you found this information helpful, but again, please reach out to our office if we can assist you with your learning needs.